Okay, everybody, we are going to get started for today. So today is August's Peer Learning Network session, and it's all about writing great grants. So we understand that those are important parts of your fundraising. You are all introducing yourselves in the chat, so please keep that coming. Again, if you want to write to panelists, you can make sure that you tick that box. And if you want to include all the other attendees in that, then make sure to click all panelists and attendees when you write your message. We will be recording this session so that you can have the link a bit later. So, some introductions. It will be myself, Katrin, and our colleague Ashish, who will be facilitating for today. So I will be speaking and introducing two of our lovely speakers for today. And we have Ashish, who is helping in the chat. So if you have any questions or indeed technical problems, then you can speak to Ashish and he will be able to help you. An agenda for today, I will be setting the scene in the first 5 minutes or so of the session. And then we're going to introduce two of our speakers. So on writing great grants, we thought it would be a great idea to have both the perspective of a funder. So we have Peter Boonman on the line, and then also the perspective of a charity. So we have Rajuta Taradesai, my colleague from GlobalGiving, but she is going to be sharing a perspective of when she ran a charity herself in India. We're going to finish with a discussion about your organization's approach to maximizing grant writing success. So in the email before this, when you registered, we asked you to come prepared to share your experiences. So please do get involved and share with your peers. So just a quick refresh about how you can get involved and make the most of this call. In terms of asking questions, you will see in front of you there is a Q&A. Please make use of that when you are asking your questions for either Peter or Rajuta, this way that we can get to them really quickly. If you have a general comment or you want to add to the discussion, then you can go ahead and use the chat feature. As mentioned, you can either write to panelists, so that will just be myself and the other speakers, or you have the option to write to all panelists and attendees. And we'd encourage you to do that during the discussion so that you can share your thoughts more widely with the group. And we also have another feature called polls. So this is where we will ask you direct questions. And speaking of which, I'm going to ask you a question about your experience of raising funds through grant writing, trusts and foundations. So if you can go ahead, you can see a poll in front of you. And if you could start to answer that question, what is your experience of raising funds from trusts and foundations, so that we and the other speakers on the call can get a sense of where you guys are. I'm going to give you just another couple of seconds. You can see most of you are responding to this. Going to wait for a few more, and we'll end that poll right there. So you can see on the screen that some of you have had some experience, and then there's a good third of you that write regularly and rely on successful grants. So I would really encourage those people to be very vocal in the chat so that we can hear and learn from your experiences. And then a couple of people have had a negative experience, and then some no experience at all. So I think that is a good place to be in and a good mixture of experiences to start this call. As a reminder, the Peer Learning Network is all about you guys reflecting on your own experiences, some good and some bad. In terms of connecting with your peers, it's about connecting with like-minded nonprofits and learning from one another's experiences. So we hope this call will provide that space for you. So today's peer learning session is all about writing great grants. I'm going to set the scene for this call and our next couple of speakers. There's some assumptions and some limitations to start with of this call. We are going to be sharing some starting and practical basics. So each of the things that we touch on today could be explored in more detail a little bit later, and we will do our best to share resources and materials after the call. But please do take advantage of having our speakers on the line so that you can ask them questions while you're live on the webinar. We also appreciate that you guys are calling in from all corners of the globe, so the environment for trusts and foundations will be very different. So we'd encourage you to, really explore what that space looks like in your own countries. And we also appreciate that trusts are just one funding channel. So they are not your whole fundraising story, but they could possibly, or do already, make up part of your fundraising. So this will not be the whole story, and that is something to bear in mind. To start with a definition, charitable trusts. So a trust is, charitable trust is a trust whose assets and income go towards benefiting the general public or a charitable cause. So an example might be the Sainsbury's Trust or the Coca-Cola Foundation. These are often set up or managed by an individual, a family, or a business. Perhaps they are an endowment that has been left, or it is a profit from a company that they want to invest into a social good. Often this means that the trust has a specific focus on a cause or an area. So it might be that they are looking to sort of invest in a specific challenge, or there is a group that is marginalized that they particularly want to focus on. Or they're interested in funding maybe a short-term or a medium-term goal, and they're expecting that you would be able to get long-term funding for that, but they're happy to chip in the interim. So it might be that the trust invites you to submit a proposal, or they are unsolicited, or you have to kind of reach out and see if they are indeed giving funds. In terms of what a trust fundraising cycle might look like, and this may be familiar to a lot of you, the basic summary is going to involve some preparation. So you will need to prepare your mission, what is your core case, and my colleague Ashish is going to post into the chat an article that explains about the core case that you can look into a bit later. But it's essentially having documentation that you can draw on to be able to complete your application. And it includes things like the evidence about your work. You're going to need to research funders. There are many out there, and not everyone will be the right fit for your organization or your cause. There'll be an element of building rapport, because funders are people, and you need to build that rapport so that you really jump off the page when they read your application. You're going to need to write the proposal. You're going to need to include a budget for that proposal, and you will need to submit it on time by whatever deadline is set. Following that, there'll be an element of following up with the funder and stewardship. Even if you aren't successful with that grant, you still may want to retain a relationship in case you decide to apply in future. So that's just a little summary of what's involved. Our speakers are going to touch on elements of these things, but you may need to, we will do our best, as I said, to provide some follow-up materials that support you in some of these areas to research further, but you may need to do some follow-up of your own on these areas. So, without further ado, I am going to introduce our first speaker, Peter Boonman. So he has worked in the banking and the not-for-profit sector, and he's now looking after a grant-making foundation, but also provides a lot of support and capacity-building services to charities. So he's a real interest in this area, and it's really great to have him on this call. So Peter, over to you. I can click the slides for you as well, Peter.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. First, hello to all of you, and I'm very excited to be with you today. And actually, I wish that when I started out as a fundraiser, I had a resource like a peer network, peer learning network, to my benefit. So it's yeah, really nice to be with you today. I think let's start with the slides. So, Catherine, if you could, yeah, okay, that's the first. Let's move to the next one. And I wanted to start with some do's and don'ts. I think a lot of these things will be very obvious, but I think, what I've pointed out is really worthwhile stressing. When I was a fundraiser and also a fundraising manager, I always was trying to be very critical of the quality of the proposals. And you'll understand that grant makers, they get lots of applications, they read a lot. They, you want to make sure that your proposal doesn't have any mistakes, and especially language. Language is so important. It really, and I've got many grant maker colleagues who all say, if the language in a proposal is not right, then actually that undermines the trust they have in your organization. So really your proposal is in that sense very important as the introduction of your organization. So my advice would be keep it short, keep it succinct, don't go too much in flowery language, let the facts of your proposal speak for them. Use good spelling, good grammar, and be to the point, and also very important, don't make stuff up, keep it genuine. I talk about the facts. It should speak for itself, but practice and experience learns that a lot of people, when there is a question that is a little bit difficult and you don't know so much about the outcomes, but you know everything about the activities, that people, instead of saying, hey, sorry, we are not completely clear yet on the answer to this question, they try to make stuff up and write about something else. Try to avoid that and be honest in your proposal. Another thing is if you are in a Western country and implementation takes place in a developing country, make sure that you've got enough facts about what is really happening on the ground. That's very important. Then the next slide, please. Yes. So what you should be doing to the grant maker is to show that your solution to a problem is the right solution and that you have got something unique to offer. Don't spend too much time on explaining the issue, because just because of the fact that the grant maker is interested in the issue, you may safely assume that they've got quite a good knowledge what the problems are. They would really like to know what your solutions are and how you are making a change, how you are benefiting the lives of the beneficiaries. There's a tip I want to give to you about, and it's some homework, but there is a theory about problem trees and objective trees. Look it up on the web, and this will hopefully help you and your colleagues who are doing the implementation to find a focus on the right problem and finding the right solution for that. And then the tailoring of the proposal, of course, very important. And the better the understanding the funder has of your proposal, the more chance you have of getting funding. So we'll see that in a minute as well. But basically, your proposal and your budget is basically your promise to the funder what your impact is going to be with their money. So in your reporting later, you will report back and show what has happened, and then you should also keep in mind that when it comes to the reporting stage, that you should be able to then also offer the analysis of what has gone right and also what has gone not so well, so that you can analyze and explain the difference. Okay, next slide, please. Sustainability. This is very important for funders, and I also hear from my colleagues in the foundations that they really want to get a good idea that when the project stops, that it will have a lasting effect. So if you can describe that well in your proposal, then, as I would say, you're scoring points. You're showing that this is something worthwhile investing in. So yeah, funders want to see a lasting change. So you need to show that after the end of the project, the situation doesn't go back to how it was before the project. Again, on the reporting, as I just explained, report on what was agreed, be clear and honest in reporting. We see in practice quite a lot that when things haven't gone fantastic, that people try to sort of obfuscate that. And actually, funny enough, if you are able to be honest also about things that go wrong and the failures in a project, that is often much appreciated by funders. Do understand that funders, they don't just fund your project, but a lot of projects. And one thing they are very keen on is to get learning. What has worked, what has not worked. They immediately understand that not everything works. And if your project happens to be a project where things didn't go as you expected for whatever reason, explain the reasons, and you'll often find that trust and foundation funders are very understanding when it comes to making mistakes or things not working out. A bugbear of some of my colleagues is what you call the cookie cutter approach. If a project works in one situation, in one area, it should also work somewhere else. And actually, in a different area, another problem might actually be more urgent of tackling, and then beneficiaries might just not be less interested in your project. So, and this is where this problem tree analysis comes in again. Always make sure that you understand the context, that you have got a good understanding of what is the real problem in an area, and then you develop from that the right solution. We have seen proposals whereby it is indeed, and I say it's keeping bums on seats. Of course, if you've got a team of people working in a certain country and they come to the end of the project and you don't have new funding in place for a follow-on project, then you might be tempted to try and raise funds almost willy-nilly, and just so you don't have to, your colleagues in that country don't have to be fired. Funders do understand that, but ultimately they are not responsible for people's jobs, and it's really about the beneficiaries. So keeping bums on seats is not sufficient reason to give funding to an organization. And sometimes we do see that actually. And indeed, show that you're a good partner. I put in there also, trust and foundations, they love being kept in the loop and they love the contact, but don't be too pushy. That sometimes is also noted. finding the right funder, of course, it's a lot of fundraising. It's just a lot of hard graft, hard work. There's lots of resources on the web. Finding out the right fit. So do your research into the funder. What is the funder really after, and what are they interested in? And I found that, and this is probably, if you are a typical trust and funding and foundation fundraiser, then you probably might feel more comfortable writing a proposal than picking up the phone. And I would really advise, do pick up the phone if you want to know something from the funder. Don't overdo it. Don't stalk the funder, but don't be afraid to pick up the phone. And I was actually amazed to see how few people try to phone the funder and get some extra information. They usually do appreciate it. Yes, agendas. Of course, you are, as a fundraiser, you want to fundraise for your project, for your organization. And then, of course, the funder might have certain interests, or a funder might actually be, how do you say that, very particular about their agenda, and they see the solution to certain problems as their ownership, and that they take ownership of it, and they almost see your organization and others as the implementers of their agenda. Be mindful of that. Are you hired to implement their agenda, or are they supporting yours? The difference may be very important, especially when it comes to things like, maybe you've heard of that, payment by results, which can really cause all kinds of trouble for an organization like yours. Of course, as a fundraiser, you want to look at how long does the process take, and prioritize who you're going to raise funds from first, and who you're going to approach first along your organization's income plan. So make a good plan, look ahead for the whole year or the whole financial year, so that you have got the order of who you are going to write to. Then networking, very important. If there are conferences, LinkedIn contacts, all kinds of gatherings, there is so much to learn, and especially when fundraisers get together, a lot of tips and tricks can be exchanged. And last but not least, there's also funders that have a certain reputation among other funders. Funders do speak with each other quite a bit, and there might be a funder who is, for example, renowned for doing due diligence and really doing their homework in almost grilling the fundraisers. So actually, if you have got funding from that foundation, then other foundations who can see that, hopefully on your website, they might say, oh, wait a minute, if they get funding from that funder, then we know almost that this organization is doing their job really well. So that might be very very helpful for you to keep in mind. And they're almost like gatekeepers for other funders. All right, next slide, please. Yeah, this is how I'd very much like you to see yourself, the chef in the fundraising kitchen. You are the the facilitator for your organization to get the funding in, and of course it's also your responsibility to come up with the money. So I always saw myself in that respect as, indeed, this chef in the kitchen and the facilitator for a group of people. So think of your implementing staff, but also your finance team, etc., so that everyone chips into your proposal and that you get all the ingredients to make a really good proposal. So in that sense, logical frameworks or theories of change, very important. Know your stuff, know the implementation, and if you've got a good grasp of that, then that's a very important ingredient, I would say, for your proposal. And also have your colleagues delivered quality ingredients, and this is very important for you to work with, because in the end it is your reputation as fundraiser also to deliver a good quality proposal to the funder. So sometimes you might want to read up on certain for example, on problem trees, objective trees. If your colleagues who are implementing are not aware of such theory, you might want to do a seminar with your colleagues so as to improve the quality of your proposal. Indeed, work with finance to create a watertight budget. Also look at things like currency differences, etc., and enough detail in the budget. And last but not least, in here, ensure the proposal is signed off by all the relevant people before you send it. You are responsible for the funding, but also the organization needs to be behind what you promise to the funder. And the next slide, please. Okay, there is an awful lot to be said about how you make your proposal and structure of it. I just wanted to point out a couple of things that I thought very important. If it's a long proposal, use a summary on the first page. As I said before, the foundation staff, they do have to read a lot. And although they know their subject matter often very well, if you give them a good summary at the beginning, then that should raise their interest to read on, even if it's a longer proposal. Yeah, indeed. Oh yes, be brief, but also use footnotes and references. If you want to refer to, I don't know, the Sustainable Development Goals or all kinds of research, it may make a very good impression if you can show where actually, often on the web, what publications you are referring to, and they could check if they want to know more. And again, your logical framework or theory of change should provide all the structure for your proposal. And indeed demonstrate that your organization is the best one to tackle this problem. If you have a clear solution, and you can also establish yourself as the organization that is best placed to do that, you will be scoring points in the eyes of the grant maker. And indeed, trusts and foundations often, because they see so many proposals from so many different organizations, they have got often a very good overview of what is happening in the field, sometimes even better than individual organizations. And if your organization is a team player in tackling a certain problem, that is often appreciated by the funder. And funders do know that it is not easy also to be a team player and to partner with other organizations. So you will definitely score points for that. And yeah, then as a last remark here, be honest. Grant makers, because they see and read so much, they really know what is going on in the field. And if you, so to speak, fake it before you make it, then they often will find out, and that is just not the position you want to be in. Use appendices if needed. So actually, if you keep your proposal short, but you have got some additional information that they think they might be interested in, or that you want to show as underpinning, and of all the resources, the sources and work you have done, use appendices, and actually they will use it a lot. It helps the structure of your proposal. If you want to have a limited number of pages, and you would go down to maybe 10-point font in your computer, I would say don't use 11 or bigger. That reads a lot better, and yeah, it shows a lot better than when you make your font small. Attention to layout and presentation, but again, don't overdo. If you are able to send very glossy publications, then the trust or foundation might often think like, oh well, they have money for their publications and for very beautiful looking and beautifully presented things that maybe an editor or there's some other professional has been working on. Then you basically give the impression that you don't need the money. You've got money to spend on those kind of things. Then attention to detail, as I said right at the beginning, be critical and let others critique your work too. I never sent out a proposal without having it been proofread by someone else, by a colleague or someone in the organization. And funny enough, you can be blind to your own language, so they often find something. If you don't have a colleague and it is just you, try to put it apart for a couple of days, put it somewhere else, and then come back to it. And then you might spot sometimes your own mistakes. And pretty obvious, I think, but still often you see fundraisers don't adhere to it, is funders have guidelines. Please read them carefully, see what the funder really means, and if you have any questions about it and you have a reason not to stick to their guidelines, please call them or write to them and agree it with them first. And then the very last thing is the budget. On the next slide. As I said before, and prepare it with reporting already in mind. So the budget is what you promise in terms of expenditure. In your reporting, you will say what has been spent, and crucially, when you report, you also want to analyze the difference and explain the difference to the funder. If you already set up your budget with that in mind, then that will make your budget more robust. Compliance issues, okay, this is strictly not so much trusts and foundations, but more statutory funders like the European Community or USAID. They might have a whole rule book on what is allowable expenditure and what is not. Make sure you're familiar with any rules that the funder has on expenditure. Reporting in what currency. Sometimes you go to a funder and your actual expenditure is in a different currency than the grant is. This may lead to either a currency gain or a currency loss. And do make sure that before you accept the grant, that you know who actually runs the risk for that. There are funders who say, if you make a loss, then that is your problem, and if you make a profit, then you need to hand on the profit to the funder. That is, I think, personally very unhelpful, but they are there, these funders, so make sure you know about it. Who will be dealing with project expenditure, programs, finance? Yeah, it's just a general rule, but before you send out a proposal, make sure that you know this. And some funders have got very specific rules about the level of detail in a budget. And this is just a tip: make sure that you agree with your finance team that it is possible for them also to report back at that level of detail. And multi-year funding, if you have, and you see this quite a lot, if you've got a grant and actually you'll find that in the implementation there are delays, that is very common, can you indeed take that forward to the next year? Make sure that you have got clarity with the funder. Overspent and underspent limits. This is between budget lines. Some funders say that you may compensate one budget line with another, but only to a maximum percentage, for example. If you know that beforehand, then you also will be able to mitigate for those instances better. And no cost extension. Funders can be very different about that. So if your project is delayed, is that a possibility with the funder that you can use the grant for a longer time. Okay, these were things I wanted to share with you that for me was important, and I hope that this has been interesting and useful for all of you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Peter. It's always so good to get a funder's perspective so that you can share those tips. I saw there was one question in the chat that I picked up on. Again, if you do have questions, put them in the Q&A so that we don't miss them. But the one question, and we can come to more as we go along the session, but is how would you, Peter, plan at the start of the year your grant fundraising? Or what would be your starting position at the start of the year? How would you plan? And that was from Shana.
Okay. I think the most important thing is to plan well ahead. If you start a given year, whether it's a financial year or a calendar year, doesn't matter, with basically nothing in the bank and nothing in your funding pipeline, then of course you've got a huge problem. So I used to make a, basically it was a cash flow format that showed for each month what I thought was going to come in from which grants, and then I could discuss that with my colleagues in finance. At the same time, for each grant that I was, for each funder that I was going to approach, I made into a calendar grid, like when would I apply, or when would the deadline be, what was the percentage of chance that the proposal had in my mind, because as a fundraiser you need to try and predict your income, and then it's basically trying to come up with a pipeline and a whole field of potential funders, and also for what part of the program, and then see like, okay, when would that money possibly come in, what is the amount and what is the percentage of chance. And by then multiplying, I would get an idea of where are the bottlenecks, and where would I be able to hit my target? So of course, you can't predict it very well, but you can make it as scientific as possible to predict your likelihood of getting the income.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Peter. That was a really good response, and I hope that's been helpful. We have another question, but Rajuta is going to be touching on that in her session. So what we're going to do is we're going to move on. So Teresa has asked, what is the best way to balance organizational objectives and the funder's interests without compromising on either? We're going to move over to Rajuta, and I'm going to introduce her. She works at GlobalGiving, but she did run her own charity in India and had many a funding application to complete, some of which were successful, and she's going to pull on and draw on some of those successful experiences she had. Thank you so much, Peter. Stay on the line. There'll probably be more questions for you.
Thank you. Right. I hope everyone is able to hear me. Hello, everyone. And so first thing is like a disclaimer from me that I'm no expert in fundraising, but I have experience of raising funds for about 10 years, small grants, big grants, and majority of that has been from foundations and trusts. Again, small amounts to big amounts. In this, as I said, as the title says, I'm going to share with you all the mistakes I've made in 10 years and the lessons I learned from those mistakes. So hopefully you are not making the same mistakes I did. So the first lesson I learned is it's extremely, extremely important to check the eligibility criteria. If it's a small donor, it's very likely that they have not specified their eligibility criteria. And that is when, as Peter was suggesting, picking up the phone, sending an email saying, is this project eligible? Because considering that there are not that many people on your team who work on fundraising, it may be just the founder and another supporting member, you don't want to be wasting time and you don't have time to waste. So check for that. Again, if you think after looking at the eligibility criteria that your program is not suitable, do not submit an application, because again, you're wasting your time, but also the time of the grant manager. And that could actually affect your credibility going forward, or it may disqualify you from future applications. So be very careful with that. When I'm looking at the eligibility criteria, there are a few things I look for is basically theme, the type of organization they want to support, the kind of leadership. So sometimes it's specified that it is mandatory for a grant or applicant organization to have a female leader. It could be anything, so do check out for that. Size of budget, duration of the grant. So do go through all of those details, thoroughly read it multiple times just to make sure that you're eligible. Another mistake around this, which I've made, is actually before starting the application, check the deadline. If the deadline is, say, in 2 days' time, and you're applying for the big grant, which requires a lot of documentation, actually don't start the application. You're not going to be able to finish that application in 2 days unless you have superpowers. But so be careful and be cautious of how much time is required for each of those applications, and then plan your whether you're going to submit or not. The next slide is the DNA match, which is, and this is a question that I also came up somewhere earlier, is see if the, sometimes we want to get money and we might be tempted to apply for a grant and apply because the money is available. Start a project because money is available. That's actually quite risky to do. One is because it can completely distract your organization from your core mission. It can give a very bad impression to the donor because you're doing something just for the money. And I know where the intention comes from, because you have costs to meet, there are administrative costs, there could be overheads that you want to pay for, but it's very, very risky if you go down that route. So my personal preference and recommendation is do not apply for a grant just for the sake of money. See that there is a match the core objective and it's not going to distract you. So the DNA match. So the other thing in this is there may be a grant that is for a huge amount, but your organization doesn't have the capacity to absorb that sort of money. Example, so there might be a grant of, say, 50,000 that is available that you can apply for, but realistically, you can only spend about 10,000 pounds. And this gap of sort of the 40,000 is huge. One, it's quite likely that when the application is received, the funder is able to see that very clearly, and then you get disqualified. So you don't want that risk. At the same time, if you may get through, and then you have this 50,000 pounds, which you're only allowed to spend on a particular project, but you don't know how to, then you're stretching yourself really thin, and that can be risky too. So make sure that DNA match, nothing applying for the grant and receiving money should not change or affect the core purpose that you exist. It should only help and strengthen it. Again, ask genuine questions. The reason I say this is sometimes, we get carried away because fundraising is all about networking, and we may get in touch with the grant manager just to, build a rapport, make ourselves sort of visible in front of them. But again, we are wasting our own time and we are wasting their time. And that comes across very easily. So make sure the questions that you're asking are genuine. Don't feel shy about asking. If something is not clear to you, please, please, please do ask that, because, that's their job to actually respond to some of the questions. The other point over here is do your homework before you ask those questions, because if the funding organization has actually answered your question in the material on their website or in the sort of application toolkit that they have shared, it may give a very bad impression, and it shows that you have not done the homework and asking the same question again. So do your homework, ask genuine questions, but use that opportunity to get that clarification, and so that you're not going down a route where you don't know what something means and you misrepresent your organization or are not giving accurate information. The next lesson I learned is follow the application guidelines. Most of the times, the donor would have stated the format in which they expect the proposal. Particularly bigger grants and bigger foundations would have made that very clear in terms of the format they use, the kind of even the template they want you to use for the budget. If they have given one, follow it to the core and do not try and send something that is different. It's not going to, it may make your proposal stand out, but not necessarily in a good way. In case there is no, sort of guideline that has been given, then there are some key points that you could use. Particularly with certain funders, you will see there are like two levels. So one is like an expression of interest, which is a much shorter proposal, and then there is a big proposal. And typically what they would say is the expression of interest needs to be approved first before the big proposal gets submitted. So in that expression of interest, what you need to mention are, next slide please, some of the points that I've mentioned here, which is the introduction to the project, the problem statement or problem justification, which is basically why is there a need for your project. And as Peter said, do not sort of use a lot of words over here. Make sure it's brief and simple. If they want further information, they can always ask you, or they may already know about that issue, sometimes better than their applicant organization. Most important part of this proposal is the solution you're offering, or the project model, and how you plan to address this particular problem. And particularly, why are you a good organization to solve that problem? Why should you do it and not somebody else? So if you're able to demonstrate that in this sort of section, it's really good. Impact you aim to achieve, and sometimes make sure that the impact is actually more than the outputs, but really focus on the outcomes and the big impact as well. The grant amount you're requesting for, if at all, you can give sort of a basic, if it's at the early stage, it may not be required for you to give a very, very detailed breakdown, but at least sort of the categories, how you plan to spend the money is important, and related to the timeline that you plan to spend the money for. Basic introduction to the organization. Now, this is a section which I have made the mistake in the past, and I've also seen some other applications where people tell everything possible about the organization try and fit it into this small section. It is not useful if basically everything in this proposal should be for and related to the program you're applying funding. So do mention about the organization broadly, but then focus on the parts that are relevant to the proposal. And the next thing is contact details. Sometimes you have the email, but if the grant officer changes and they don't have the contact details, somehow they don't know how to contact you. So make sure that your contact details are mentioned even in the proposal somewhere. I think this is something that was a feedback given to me 2 or 3 times, which is use impact-focused language in your proposals. So it is quite tempting for us to tell the donor of what we are going to do and how we are going to do it, but we completely forget to sort of build that picture of what those activities would mean, what benefit it would mean. So how would the beneficiaries or the people you're working with, what this activity is going to do for them. So the impact-focused language, even constantly when you're describing the project, giving the program description, make sure you're using impact-focused language. And again, don't get carried away with the activity and the process, but really focus on what it's going to help you achieve as an organization, and more importantly, how is it going to benefit the people you work with. Check with your team. I think this is something that's very important, particularly a lot of the applications ask for the details of the board members, senior leadership. Make sure that they're aware of the proposals, the information you're submitting, because they may be contacted to ask a particular question and they may not know the answer, or they may give a contradictory answer, which is both the situations you want to avoid. Also, particularly when you're working on detailed proposals, the team that is going to be working on that program, it's essential that they're part of sort of drafting that proposal, putting that budget together, because they may definitely will know certain details that you may not have factored in. And so that when you come to program implementation stage, in case a proposal is successful, you have not missed out and you have not under budgeted or over budgeted in certain areas, and you're still delivering on the same thing. And also that when then, say for example, often you will have a phone call with the funder, particularly at the later stage of a proposal, or they may come and see you. At that stage, if everybody is on the same page, has bought into the concept, it really comes across. And a lot of I can think of one particular big donor that we had, where the proposal was fine. I think the pin dropped for them when they came and saw our team, not even the grassroots work, but our team, and how convinced our team was, how thorough and on the same page they were. That was something that really got us that particular grant. So make sure everybody is on the same page. Just on that point, I would also say, as I said, the design of the program, if you're designing something from scratch, ensure the team and the people you work with are a part of that process. And I know this is a big exercise, but it's definitely worth doing, not just for receiving funding, but for the success of your program. My next thing is answer the question that is asked. What happens often is we want to give the donor all the information that we have about this program, because our programs are amazing. You want them to know everything, whereas everything is not relevant, and everything you may still be able to tell them everything, but just make sure you follow the structure. So if the question is about, as I said, the organization, you can talk about it. Probably you may be running 10 programs, but right now for this application, those 10 programs may not be relevant. The thinking behind the 10 programs might be, or your sort of theory of change might be, but not the information of 10 programs. So make sure you're answering the question. And even, for example, when you look at the eligibility criteria or what sort of funding this organization provides, you would have seen the funder use some keywords, the key areas of interest. Now, in your proposal, I'm not saying change the facts, but make sure that you make those connections to the key areas and articulate them. Because sometimes we assume that this is understood, but it's not articulated in our proposals, and so it may not come across. So it's really critical to answer the question, but also sort of relate it to the information that has already been provided by the funder. Do a reality check. So once my organization was actually on the funding side and we were receiving applications for a grant which is relatively small, and we received applications, for example, I'm going to give a random number just to explain the situation. So if the grant was for about £10,000 and we received multiple applications saying we are going to use that money to work across 80 villages. And 80 villages, the kind of intervention they were suggesting and sort of the impact they wanted to achieve, we knew that it was not going to be possible within the £10,000. So do a reality check over there. You do want to mention ambitious and competitive targets, but make sure that you would be able to deliver on them. And you're not going to be not going to have to spend money out of your own organization's pocket to be able to actually deliver them, because there's a lost opportunity there. And make sure those targets that we mentioned are specific, measurable, accurate, realistic, and time-bound. Because more and more funders are now holding, rightly so, are holding nonprofits accountable for the money they're spending, but not just the money they're spending, but what they plan to achieve with it. And it is really, really important that we have these targets to be smart, as we say. Now, this is slightly controversial because often however we want to put it, there is often the power dynamic between a funder and sort of a grantee organization. And more funders are working to get rid of that sort of power dynamic and the hierarchy. But sometimes you may come across some unprofessional behavior or sort of this hierarchical structure. I would highly recommend that in the long term, and they're sort of wanting to build a strong partnership with the donor, try and address it with them if possible. It may not be possible to address it with a direct person who is creating that problem, but maybe find an appropriate way, an appropriate person to communicate that with. Do not succumb to it, and just because a donor is saying something, don't go out of your way to do something that is not right, and to be careful with that. And remember that it is their job to give you the money. Basically, when I say give you the money, I mean to appropriate projects as they have laid out the criteria. Similarly, it is your job or our job to ask for that money from them. So nobody is doing any favor over here. And so be comfortable. If there's a problem, ask about it. If you see a bit of hierarchy or any sort of unprofessional behavior, raise your hand for that. And the last thing is make the grant officer's job easy, because as Peter was saying, that they receive hundreds of applications. If we want our application to stand out, our application needs to look good. It needs to be absolutely accurate. It needs to be a real representation of the work that we do. So if you are actually hiring a consultant or there's a volunteer who's working on sort of writing this proposal, make sure the accuracy, knowledge, and the passion of your organization comes through. So the more information that we provide and the more accurate and the logical order we present in, it's going to be helpful and going to make their job easy and increase the chances of us receiving the money. So that's it from me. Any questions?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rajuta. That was super, super helpful and great to have that charity perspective. I've got one question, Rajuta, for you. So Fred has asked, sometimes he comes across occasions where for a funder, they say that they're not looking for any unsolicited applications. Would you, thinking back to your charity, what would you have done in that situation?
I would say, actually, if they have specifically said no unsolicited applications do not apply, but if you're able to find a connection who can introduce you to that particular organization, it's a more longer term sort of solution, but do look for contacts. It may be somebody from your network, or it may be one of your partner organizations who has been funded by them. See if you can get an introduction to them. It may not result in a grant, but at least it may result in them knowing about you, so in future they may consider your organization.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rajuta. So what we're going to do is, because I can see that it is coming up to time, and I want you guys to finish on time. So what we're going to do is we are going to end the session with a poll. There is a discussion question that I want to have, and I'm going to move that onto our Facebook group so that you can leave on time. I'm going to ask you to share your experience on how you guys from your organisation maximise your chances of having successful grant writing applications. So please do get in touch throughout the day on the Facebook chat. So I'm just going to launch a poll, a final poll to get your thoughts on today's session. So if you can just take a moment to let us know how it's helped you to improve your knowledge on the topic of grant writing, perhaps your confidence, and then your sense of connectedness with others on the call, and whether you'd recommend. So I'm going to give you a few moments. If you can take your time to just answer that now. Thank you. That's excellent. I'll keep going. Need a few more to answer. So there's a poll right in front of you. Poll right in front of you, if you can just fill that in. Give you a few more seconds. And while you're doing that, I'm going to run through some of the key considerations. I think it was unanimous from both speakers. You've got to do your research and find out if the funder is the right fit for you. Make sure that you are following their application guidelines. And the key one that there was crossover as well was use this impact-focused language. So I think Peter talked about talking about outcomes rather than activities, and Rajuta completely just underlined that fact. Don't just talk about the activities you're doing, talk about the end goals and what are the actual outcomes that are happening there. Keep going with the poll. I think we've got room for a few more answers, and please do be realistic with your application target. Okay. So if you guys are interested in joining Peer Learning Network for September, we're going to be talking about engaging children in education. So if this speaks to you or your organisation, then we'd love to have you on the call next week. One question in the Q&A, we're going to stay online and we're going to type those in for you. But we are going to end for today so that we do not hold you back from your meetings this afternoon. Thank you so much for attending, and thank you to all of our speakers. It was so great to have such great tips and experiences from the two of you. Thank you, and goodbye, everyone.